Well, hey YouTube, it's Eric. I'm back here in the bike room. Wanted to share a quick video with you. A few weeks ago, I was part of an online panel discussion organized by Randonneurs USA that had a number of us talking about different aspects of going to PBP in 23, training for it, preparing, so on. I talked about lodging. That's a topic that I kind of expanded to cover a number of different issues related to sort of staying in France and getting your stuff there, moving it around, and so on. So that's what my presentation is about. What you're going to see is a slightly edited version of my full Zoom presentation. I will mention before I start that a lot of what I say, or some of it anyway, is based on my assumption that Rambouillet will be the start town for PBP in 2023. That has not been decided as of the date of this video that I know of. So I hope you enjoy the video. I do plan on making more. Listening to the other folks during that Zoom conference really kind of kindled my imagination and brought to mind things that I would have talked about in my PBP tips series already and just haven't gotten around to it. So there are a number of more to come. So I hope you enjoy the video. I hope you're keeping up with your training, staying healthy, staying COVID free, and looking forward to a couple of fruitful years of training before PBP launches again in 2023.
Eric Norris is a three-time finisher of PBP, and he has been riding brevets as a RUSA member since 2007. Eric rides a wide variety of bicycles over a wide variety of terrains and distances, including crossing the Continental Divide on a fixed gear. Eric attended PBP 2019 and to his surprise found that he was a bit of a celebrity as a result of his YouTube series, PBP Tips, which first appeared in the lead up to PBP 2019. Thanks for presenting today, Eric.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rob. And thanks to all of you out there for listening to us. I'm sure you've guessed that we will talk for hours about this stuff. So I will say in terms of listening to the other folks, it's an honor for me to be on a panel with such great, accomplished randonneurs. My randonneuring career, to some extent, has been how to do things wrong, but still finish. Rob mentioned that I started doing brevets in 2007 as a RUSA member. That's the year I did PBP. It was my first 1200K. I'd never done anything longer than a 600. I did it on a fixed gear in the rain. So just a lesson in how not to do PBP. So some things to think about when you're planning your trip to France. Well, first of all, where to stay. And this has become a little bit different in 2019. So here's a map of the Paris region. And just one thing to think about is that Paris is over here, and that's where you'll probably be traveling into and spending some time. Rambouillet is way over here. It's about a 60-kilometer drive. So I just did a really quick routing on Apple Maps before the presentation here. So it's about 60 kilometers, an hour and a half by car. You can take the train there, but compared to being in the prior start cities, it's harder to get to. It's more out in the country, which makes sense because it was originally founded as a place for Napoleon to get out into the country and go hunting. So it's a very nice place. I like the city. I was very pleased with what we saw when we were there in 2019, but it does bring up some challenges. One of those is just how you get there. Now, this is the regional train that goes into Rambouillet, back into Paris, and it goes farther on. So there are trains. One thing I'll point out here that you can see, a lot of French people. This is their train, and this is what they use to go back and forth between Rambouillet and Paris. So you'll find, depending on what time you're trying to get yourself and all your stuff from one place to another, you're going to be on the train with a whole trainload of French people who are maybe minorly inconvenienced by all these cyclists with all their stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. So getting to Rambouillet, as I said, is easy by train. Check the schedule, because one thing that you're going to have to plan ahead for, and this depends on what your start time is are there trains that even get there? If you're doing the 80 and 90-hour starts, not as big of an issue because they start in the later part of the day. If you're doing the 84-hour start, that can be a problem. Traveling with a bike box is something that many of us will end up doing unless you decide to buy a bike over in France, which is a whole nother adventure. It can be done. It's a little challenging, especially on the metro. If you've been on any other subway, if you've been on the subway in New York, you'll know it's not really conducive to carrying large things onto it and moving slowly. The regional trains are easier, but even then, it helps if you're not trying to lug all your stuff by yourself. And as I mentioned in the last item here, depending on the day and the time that you're doing this, you're going to be competing with space for commuters. So just keep that in mind. It's really their train. You're a guest there. So put up with the dirty looks and smile, and you'll be off the train in a little while. Recommendations on some places to stay. First of all, Rambouillet is great, but it's a little bit small, and I'll get into that in a second. I would recommend, especially for the 2/3 or so of folks who are going over there for the first time, if you've never been to France, do plan to stay in Paris for at least a few days. You might want to think about getting into France ahead of time. Getting over jet lag is one of the things you'll have to kind of deal with on an individual basis. But if you have time ahead of the ride, stop in France and spend a few days there. It would be, in my opinion, a terrible shame if you went all the way over there, went to Rambouillet, rode your bike, and then went home. You have to go to Paris. If you do plan to stay in Rambouillet, you're going to need to book in advance. There's only limited places to stay. I'll talk about that in a second. I would recommend probably about a year ahead to start looking around and book your place. I had an Airbnb in the heart of Rambouillet in 2019 that I booked about 8 or 10 months ahead of time, and it was great. But you'll find that obviously, as you get closer to the day of the event, those places are going to fill up. And then finally, think about what's going to happen with all your stuff while you're riding. You're going to have a bike box, probably a lot of luggage. I pack pretty well, but even then, I carry a lot of stuff. And while you're riding, that stuff has to sit somewhere. So think about what's going to happen with that, and we'll talk about that too. Now, Rob, I'm not sure if there's going to be kind of a semi-official RUSA arrangement again. In 2007, 2011, there was a company that did that stuff for us. There was a company that did some stuff in 2019. By that time, I had kind of weaned myself off of needing the assistance. But one thing to look into, as we get closer to the ride, is whether there will be a company helping out with making travel arrangements to get over there. Getting there, by the way, is a whole nother thing in terms of looking for airline tickets and so on. But some more things about lodging. Hotels, as I mentioned, limited choices in Rambouillet. There's not a whole lot of places there, and there's not a whole lot of stuff around it because it's just a relatively small place out in the middle of the French countryside. There are Airbnb places. There are probably other platforms as well that you can look into, but Airbnb has a reasonable number of places around there. Prices are pretty reasonable. I think I paid about $80 a night for the place that we stayed in. We had my daughter and I went over there. We had our own private part of a house right off of the square there. As I mentioned, start looking ahead, and piggybacking on one of the prior speakers, being able to speak French is going to be very helpful. It's not required, but particularly, I think, in my experience anyway, in dealing with an Airbnb host, they didn't speak any English. I spoke a little bit of French, and we were able to get through. So really quickly, I just did a quick search on Airbnb so you can see, a fair range of places. And you also see that they're pretty cheap. You can get down as low as $34 a night. What I've done in past years, I did this in 2015 and I did in 2019 because I had my daughter with me. She had to stay someplace. But in 2015, I found a very inexpensive hotel. It was actually called, I think it was a Formula E or Formula One, very kind of micro hotel, but it was so cheap. I just rented it for the entire length of PBP. So I just left everything in my room, didn't have to worry about where I was going to put it. So if you can find a place cheap enough like that, that's one option for you. Here are the hotels. If you went to hotels.com and looked up hotels in Rambouillet, as I mentioned, there's not a whole lot of places, and you've got to go a long way outside of Rambouillet before you start finding more hotels. So if you're going to stay in town, you want to start thinking about that a long time ahead and book that stay. So I think I've hit these items here. So in terms of getting to the start, though, first of all, as I mentioned, Rambouillet is out in the country. There's not a whole lot of other stuff near it if you're not there. So again, for the 80 to 90-hour starts, not hard to get there on the train, but they're going to fill up. There were a whole bunch of people coming to the start on the train at that time. It got pretty hectic. 84-hour start is a little more difficult because you're going to need to be there early in the morning, and there may not be a train coming into town at the time you need to be there. That's a time when you maybe want to check with your friends who are staying maybe at a hotel or an Airbnb in Rambouillet and say, hey, can I hot sheet it? You're going to leave. Can I sleep in your place that last night before I start riding in the morning? You can get a friend to drive you if you know somebody over there who's maybe going to be doing some traveling around Paris while you're out riding. That's a great option. You can ride your bike to the start. If 1200K is not quite enough, you can get another 120K and ride back and forth between Paris and Rambouillet, or just stay in town. That's the easiest of all. So as I mentioned, while you're riding, you need to find something to do with all your stuff. That's the pile of things that I brought in 2015, excluding our cat. She did not come on the ride. If you have a spouse, relative, significant other who's not doing the ride, you're golden. You just leave your stuff with them wherever they're going to be staying. Check with the hotel or the Airbnb that you're staying at. Ask them, is it going to be possible for you to just put your stuff in the storage room? A lot of places are amenable to that, but you're going to need to put all this stuff that you're seeing, you know, on the screen here somewhere while you're riding. And you can also look into services like Nanny Bag. Nanny Bag is it's a website. I'll show a link to it at the end of the presentation here, where you can basically find lodging for your bags. A couple other things about staying in France, especially if you're going to stay in Paris. If you've never been there, hotel rooms, they're very small, really small. A lot of them are charming, you know, mostly. I've never stayed in a bad place in Paris, but look forward to staying in a small room. Look forward to stairs. They don't believe in elevators in a lot of places, especially in Paris again, because you're probably going to be in, well, in a lot of cases, in a more, let's say, historic building that weren't built with elevators, and they do not retrofit them. So the last place I stayed in Paris, I think there were like 8 or 10 flights of stairs to get up to it every single time you wanted to go up and down. Just a little minor thing, especially in an older place where you don't have like the card key. When you leave the hotel, they're going to keep the key. You leave the hotel, you give the key to them. When you come back, they'll give the key to you. I found it strange because I'd never done that before, but that's how they do it in France, and I would assume in a lot of Europe. Your bike might not be welcome in the hotel. So if you're going to stay there with your bike, just check with them ahead of time. Say, hey, by the way, I'm going to have my bike with me. Is it okay if I bring that into the room? Back in the day when we all stayed at the Campanile in the start town, they actually had a bike room. You could not take your bike up to the rooms, but they had a conference room that they set up, and there were, I don't know, literally hundreds of bikes in there. It was kind of amazing. So all the bike boxes were stacked up. The bikes were packed in there like 3 or 4 deep to the walls. So look into that. One thing you'll find when you go over there in the hotels and generally around, especially in Paris, is that Wi-Fi is pretty widely available. When I first went there, it was not, but you know, it's like anywhere else. It's becoming better. By the way, it's Wi-Fi. When you go over there, they don't know what Wi-Fi is. It's Wi-Fi. And finally, just in terms of staying, European plugs, keep that in mind. Bring an adapter. You can buy, you know, cheap adapters on Amazon. I found it's really helpful just to bring one that has the European plug and then USB plugs coming out of it, or you can bring your American USB, adapter and plug it into your European adapter. But be sure and think about that before you leave, or you'll be scrambling around trying to charge everything. So a couple of quick links. Hotels.com is a site that I use just because I have membership points there. Airbnb, there are many other places, but Airbnb has a fairly good selection of places there. Nannybag.com is the website for that service. And then I put just a couple of the websites for the regional trains, the RATP and the SNCF. They have English websites, so you don't need to worry about reading everything in French. And finally, I'll just note, I think Rob mentioned that I launched a whole series of videos about PBP on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search for PBP tips. You'll bring up my channel. I've got a list of, it's up to 49 videos about all different aspects of PBP. Some of them are my take on some of the topics that have been talked about today. There's a whole bunch of others. So I welcome you to go there and check those out. And as Rob mentioned, it was surprising to see how many people from everywhere had viewed my videos. People who I don't think spoke any English, but they had read or watched my videos and knew me. My daughter was getting disgusted by the time we left. So I'm going to stop my share here. Again, thanks to everyone for listening to my presentation. I'll look in the comments for questions, and we'll get back to those at the end of the show. All right, Rob, back to you.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you haven't seen the rest of my PBP tips series, I'll put a link down in the description. I'm also going to put a link down there to the entire RUSA program. A number of really accomplished randonneurs were on hand, talked about a lot of topics, from bike choice to training to how to do a PBP in an insanely short amount of time. So I'm sure you'll find something in there that you'll enjoy, and I hope to see you again here on YouTube. Bye.